When the hall started filling up that evening, no one noticed the quiet young woman sitting in the corner near the stage steps. She sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, looking down at the floor, as if she hoped no one would pay attention to her. People walked past her without giving a second glance. Some carried musical instruments, some chatted loudly about their performance pieces, and some simply waited for the event to begin. But she just sat there, trying to calm her breathing, trying to tell herself that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. She had signed up for this performance weeks ago. But even now, as she watched the bright lights shining across the stage, a part of her wondered if she had made a mistake. Her heart beat too fast. Her palms felt cold. She knew she wasn't confident like most performers. She didn't walk with bold steps. She didn't talk like she owned the room. She didn't look like someone ready to amaze a whole hall of people. If anything, she looked like someone who wanted to disappear. A small group of people sat in the first few rows, whispering to each other as they checked the list of performers. One of them pointed toward her and asked quietly, "Who is she? I haven't seen her before." The others shrugged. Someone guessed she was probably new and might not even know how big the event was. Another said she didn't look like someone who would perform anything impressive. The last person in the group chuckled, saying she looked too nervous to even press a key on the piano. Those whispers weren't loud, but she heard enough. Her ears picked up bits and pieces, and her heart sank. She wished she could hide backstage until her turn came. She wished she didn't need to walk in front of all these people. But she also knew she had worked too hard to turn back now. She had practiced late into the night for weeks, hoping that maybe, finally, she could show people what she kept inside her for so long. She knew she was quiet. She knew she didn't stand out. But she wasn't clueless. She had something worth sharing, something music had helped her protect for years. Her turn was still far away. But the thought of standing up in front of strangers made her stomach twist. She kept telling herself to breathe slowly. She had read somewhere that slow breathing helps steady the mind. She tried it now. Breathe in, breathe out. But the moment she looked toward the stage again, all the fear rushed back. The stage looked too big. The lights looked too bright. The audience looked too many. A few performers went up before her. Some played violins, some sang, and some performed short piano pieces. The crowd clapped politely after each performance, but she wasn't watching them closely. Her mind stayed busy imagining how she would walk up the steps, how she would sit at the piano, how the whole hall would look at her. Waiting to see if she would embarrass herself or surprise them, her foot tapped lightly on the floor without her noticing. It was a habit she developed over the years whenever she felt nervous. Music teachers had pointed it out many times, but she could never stop it. It wasn't a mistake, it was simply the way she calmed her thoughts. Each tap had a rhythm, a quiet beat that reminded her she wasn't lost. She belonged to music, even if she didn't look like someone who could stand proudly in front of a crowd. When another performer finished, the announcer's voice echoed across the hall, calling the audience to stay ready for the next act. The young woman felt her heart jump when she heard how close her turn was getting. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. She rubbed her palms together, trying to warm them. She told herself she could do this. She didn't need to impress the entire world. She just needed to play from her heart. But the whispers continued. A pair of teenagers sitting behind her commented that she didn't look like someone who would survive 5 seconds on stage. Another man guessed she would play something easy because someone that shy would never choose a difficult piece. She knew they weren't trying to hurt her. They didn't even know her. They were just judging based on what they saw. But those little judgments added weight to her already heavy heart. She closed her eyes, letting the noise fade for a moment. She imagined the piano back at home, the one she had practiced on for years. She imagined the quiet room where she could play without worrying about anyone watching her. She imagined how the music felt, warm, strong, comforting. That memory tightened her chest with emotion. The piano never asked her to speak louder or smile more. It never made her feel small. With music, she could be herself without fear. Someone called her name from the side of the stage. It was the event coordinator reminding her that she would perform soon. She nodded quietly and stood up. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to walk toward the steps. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the side of the stage, she looked out at the hall from the corner. So many faces. So many eyes. She swallowed hard. The performer before her finished. A wave of applause filled the hall. Then came the announcer's voice again, calling her name and inviting her to the stage. She froze for a second. Her breath caught in her throat. She felt as though the world had paused, waiting for her to take the first step. The coordinator gave her an encouraging nod. She forced herself to move. She stepped onto the stage slowly. Her shoes clicked softly against the wooden floor. The light shone brightly on her face, making her blink several times. She could feel the entire hall studying her. Some faces looked curious. Some looked doubtful. Some looked confused, as if wondering how someone so quiet ended up here. She reached the piano and sat down. Her hands trembled slightly as she positioned herself. The bench felt colder than she expected. She placed her fingers above the keys but did not touch them yet. She needed just a moment. A moment to gather courage. A moment to remember why she was here. The hall grew silent. Waiting for her first note, she could still hear the whispers at the back of her mind. She looks too shy. She probably won't play well. She doesn't seem ready. Those words wrapped around her, trying to pull her down. Slowly, she lifted her eyes and looked across the hall, not at the people, but at the space above them. She didn't need to meet their eyes. She just needed to breathe. She closed her eyes for a brief second. Her foot tapped once on the floor. She took one long, deep breath. The kind she practiced every night before playing her hardest pieces. And in that moment, something shifted inside her, not enough to erase her fear, but enough to help her face it. She lowered her head slightly, let her hands fall gently onto the keys, and prepared herself to begin. Even though the whole room doubted her, even though she felt small and unsure, she knew the truth deep inside. Once she played her first note, nothing would be the same. Her fingers rested lightly on the piano keys, but she still hadn't played a single note. The hall was silent, so silent that she could hear her own heartbeat echoing inside her chest. It was a strange kind of quiet, the kind that made her feel both exposed and powerful at the same time. Every person in the audience seemed to be waiting for something. Some looked unimpressed, others looked bored, and a few seemed curious to see what she would do next. But no one expected anything extraordinary from her. She took another slow breath. She remembered how many times she had practiced this exact moment at home, sitting at her old piano, imagining an audience in front of her. But imagining it and living it were completely different things. In her room, the silence felt comforting. Here, the silence weighed heavily on her shoulders. Pressing down with everyone's doubts, her hands trembled slightly. For a second, she wondered if she should walk off the stage. The thought flashed through her mind like a small, painful spark. She imagined standing up, apologizing softly, and running backstage before anyone could judge her. It seemed like the easiest option, but then she remembered why she had agreed to perform in the first place. She remembered the months of practice, the nights she stayed awake replaying her pieces over and over again. The mornings she woke up early just to fit in more practice before school or work. She remembered how playing the piano made her feel. Calm, alive, understood, whole. She also remembered the promise she made to herself, that she would play not because she wanted applause, but because she wanted to share what she carried inside her heart. That thought brought a small wave of strength. Not a big wave, not something dramatic, but something gentle and steady enough to keep her sitting there. Instead of running away, she let her fingers press the first key. The sound was soft but clear, floating through the hall like a delicate breath. It was just one note, but it carried emotion, not loud, not showy, but honest. A couple of people in the front row glanced at each other, surprised by the gentle beauty in that single sound. She didn't notice them. The moment she played the first note, something inside her loosened. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Her breath became more steady. Then came the second note, and then the third, forming the soft beginning of her piece. The music was calm at first, like a quiet voice telling a story she had never shared out loud. Her fingers moved slowly, but with certainty, as though they finally remembered what they had been practicing for so long. The hall remained quiet except now. It wasn't the heavy silence from before. It was a listening silence. A curious silence. The kind of silence people give when they realize something meaningful is happening. With each passing second, her hands grew more confident. The slow melody created a warm feeling in the air. People who had been whispering stopped mid-sentence. A few leaned forward in their seats. A group of students sitting near the back sat up straighter. Even the event coordinator peeked from behind the curtain. Surprised by the sudden shift in the atmosphere, she wasn't looking at the audience. She kept her eyes half closed, focusing on the keys, the rhythm, and the story she was trying to tell. The fear that had filled her chest minutes earlier began to dissolve, melting into the music. It was like her hands were guiding her instead of the other way around. They moved softly, but with purpose. Gliding across the keys with surprising grace, the melody slowly grew deeper, more emotional. She pressed certain keys with a little more weight, letting the sound spread across the hall like a soft wave. Anyone listening carefully could feel the emotions behind the note-seers of quiet struggles. Late-night dreams and silent hopes wrapped into a beautiful, tender sound. Someone in the audience whispered, "She's good. Really good." The person next to them nodded slowly, surprised. The group who earlier said she looked too nervous exchanged shocked looks. A man in the center row lifted his eyebrows in disbelief, wondering how someone who looked so timid could play with such feeling. But she didn't hear any of it. All she heard was the music. She felt her fingers grow warmer as she moved into the heart of the piece. Where the melody became more expressive, her hands moved faster now, but not in a rushed or messy way. Every note was played with careful control. Every sound had a meaning behind it. Her foot tapped lightly on the pedal, guiding the flow of the sound, giving it the softness or strength it needed. The audience's reaction continued to change. At first, they doubted her. Then they grew curious. And now, they were impressed. Even from the back of the hall, you could feel the shift. The energy now felt warm, almost protective. People didn't just want her to do well, they wanted her to keep going. Her expression softened as she played. Her eyes remained focused on the keys, but there was a calmness around her. The stage that once felt intimidating now felt like a place she belonged. The piano wasn't a stranger, it was the one thing that understood her better than anything else. And now, everyone in the hall was beginning to understand her a little too, as she entered one of the more challenging sections. Her fingers moved with a confidence that surprised even her. Her left hand created a steady bass, while her right hand danced lightly over the higher keys. The melody grew richer, more emotional. Some people in the audience felt goosebumps rise on their skin. A few held their breath, amazed by the way she controlled each note in that moment. She no longer looked like the shy young woman who walked onto the stage. She looked like someone who had spent years learning how to turn her emotions into music. She looked like someone who had finally found her voice, even if it wasn't through words. When she reached the soft middle section, the hall felt like it had paused. The notes were so delicate that people leaned close, afraid to miss even a single sound. Her hands moved slower again, giving each note space to breathe. The melody settled into something warm and soothing. Like a gentle memory she was sharing with strangers she would never speak to. Some people closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Some smiled softly without realizing it. A child sitting with his mother stopped fidgeting and stared at the stage, completely still. A couple sitting near the side held hands, moved by the emotional depth of her playing, and all this happened because she pressed that first note. She didn't know how many hearts she was touching. She didn't know how much the audience's opinion had already changed. She didn't know how deeply people were feeling her music, but she could feel the connection, not through words, not through applause, but through something invisible. Something created by the quiet understanding. It forms when someone plays from the heart and someone else listens with theirs. The young woman moved into the next part of the piece, where the melody began to rise slowly. Her hands lifted slightly higher, her movements becoming more expressive. The emotional buildup filled the hall with anticipation. People could sense that something powerful was coming, and then it arrived. With a smooth, confident motion, she pressed into the next set of keys with more force. The sound grew bolder, stronger. It carried across the entire hall, touching every corner. Some people felt chills run through them. Others felt a warm pressure in their chest. The shy girl who once seemed unnoticed was now commanding the entire room without. Saying a single word, her eyes opened slightly wider. Her posture straightened. Her face revealed quiet determination. The music pulsed with her emotions, everything she had, kept hidden behind silence. That was the moment the whole audience realized they were witnessing something special. What began as doubts had turned into admiration. What began as whispers had turned into silence, respectful, stunned silence. The same people who thought she might fail were now sitting on the edge of their seats, waiting for every next note, and she continued to play, unaware that her music was slowly changing the minds and hearts of everyone sitting in that hall. The music grew richer, and the hall grew quieter. Every note she played carried more depth, more confidence, and more meaning. The audience, who had once doubted her, now sat completely still, as if breathing too loudly would disturb the magic she was creating. It was almost unbelievable how quickly the whole room had changed, from whispers of doubt to complete silence filled with respect and fascination. As she continued playing, something inside her changed as well. The fear that had once made her hands cold was gone. The nervous knot in her stomach had softened. Her heartbeat, which had been racing at the start, now followed the rhythm of the piece. She finally felt like she belonged on that stage. Like this was exactly where she was meant to be. Her fingers moved effortlessly over the piano keys. Every small movement, every gentle press, every dynamic shift came naturally to her now. She didn't have to think. She didn't have to remember. The music flowed out of her like a living thing, full of emotion she didn't know how to express with words. Her eyes opened only occasionally, just enough to make sure her hands were where they needed to be. But most of the time, she let herself feel her way through the melody. People in the front row leaned forward, completely absorbed. A woman clasped her hands together near her chin, her eyes shining with emotion. A young student sitting next to her mouthed the word "wow" to his friend, who simply nodded, too stunned to speak. Even the older man who had doubted her earlier now watched with widened eyes, his expression softening as he listened. It was clear he no longer saw her as a shy girl struggling with fear. He saw a musician with rare depth, near the back of the hall. A family who had come only to support another performer found themselves whispering to each other about her. She came out of nowhere, one of them said softly. "I didn't expect this." Another replied, "Nobody did." Their voices weren't mocking, they were full of surprise and respect. But she didn't hear any of this. She was lost inside the music, not in a distracted way, but in a beautiful, focused way. Her breath matched the rise and fall of the melody. Her shoulders relaxed. Her expression softened. She looked peaceful, almost glowing under the warm stage lights. It was the kind of transformation that only happens when someone is doing what they truly love. As she moved into the next part of her piece, the emotions deepened. The notes became fuller, more powerful, as though she was pouring everything she had ever felt into the piano. Her right hand danced lightly across the upper keys, while her left hand carried the deeper, stronger foundation underneath. The combination created a layered sound that spread through the hall like a wave. Some people in the audience closed their eyes, letting the sound carry them. Others stared at her in admiration, marveling at the contrast between the shy girl who had walked on stage and the confident musician now sitting before them. Even children, who normally got restless in long performances, sat quietly, completely drawn into the music. At one point, the lights above her dimmed slightly, giving the stage a soft, warm glow. It made the moment feel even more intimate, as if the whole world had shrunk down to just her, the piano, and the people listening. It felt like a moment that didn't belong to time, like something that would stay in the hearts of everyone there long after the event was over. As the piece grew more complex, her hands began to move faster. Her fingers flew across the keys, creating a sound that was sharp but beautiful, strong but controlled. The audience held their breath. No one expected someone who looked so gentle to play with such fire. It wasn't just skill, it was passion. It was honesty. It was everything she had never said out loud. Her foot pressed the pedal at the perfect moments, blending notes together like colors in a painting. The hall filled with a warmth that couldn't be described. It was the feeling of witnessing something real, something pure. A few people exchanged glances, the kind that said, "Did you feel that too?" Because the music didn't just sound good, it touched something deep inside them. It reminded them of memories, dreams, emotions they had forgotten or pushed aside. One elderly woman sitting near the side quietly wiped a tear from her eye. She wasn't sad, she was moved. The music reminded her of someone she once loved, someone she hadn't thought about in years. Music has a way of doing that, bringing the past back gently. It's like a warm breeze carrying an old scent. As the piece built toward its emotional center, the energy in the hall grew stronger. Even the event staff, who usually stayed busy organizing things backstage, stopped to listen. A technician holding a clipboard lowered it slowly, completely absorbed. A volunteer near the curtains mouthed, "She's incredible." And she was. She didn't lift her head to acknowledge any of this. She didn't need to. Her connection was not with the audience's eyes, it was with their hearts through her music. The notes rose, and dipped, then climbed again in a beautiful pattern. Her entire body seemed to move gently with the rhythm. Not exaggerated, not forced, but naturally, like she had become part of the music itself. It was rare to see someone play with such sincerity. Most performers try to look confident. She didn't try. She simply was. Halfway through the piece, the tone changed again. The melody softened, becoming more fragile, almost like a whisper. Her touch on the keys lightened. She slowed down slightly, letting each note linger in the air longer before moving to the next. The hall grew even quieter. You could have heard a pin drop. It felt like the whole room was holding its breath, afraid to break the spell. Her expression softened too. Her eyebrows relaxed. Her hands moved gently, telling a story that only she fully understood, but everyone somehow felt. It was the kind of moment that makes people forget they are sitting in a hall with hundreds of others. It was personal. It was intimate. It felt like she was playing directly to each person individually. The emotional softness of this section touched people in different ways. Some smiled faintly. Some blinked more often, hiding tears. Some leaned forward even closer, drawn in by the honesty of the sound, and still she continued, unaware of how deeply she was touching everyone around her, as she approached the next dramatic rise in the music. She prepared herself instinctively. Her breath steadied. Her fingers positioned themselves. Then, with perfect timing, she pressed down with more strength, letting the music swell again. The sudden rise created a wave of surprise in the room. A few people gasped quietly, not because anything went wrong, but because it was stunning. The energy in the hall shifted again, this time to something bright and powerful. Her hands moved with flawless coordination, her fingers lifting and falling like rain on glass. The hall seemed to vibrate with the sound. The young woman who once looked scared now looked unstoppable. Even though she didn't open her eyes fully, she felt the change. She felt the music lifting her, guiding her, supporting her. She felt the room responding to her in a way she had never imagined. She didn't need their applause. She didn't need their approval. But she felt their hearts listening, and that feeling was more powerful than anything. When she reached the final buildup of Part 3, her hands moved faster than ever, yet every note was clear, sharp, and full of emotion. Her body leaned slightly forward, completely immersed in the piece. The music climbed higher and higher, the notes filling every inch of the hall. People were no longer just impressed, they were mesmerized. It was no longer a shy girl playing the piano, it was someone who had found her voice, her strength, and her truth. The final notes of this section rang out, strong and bright, echoing beautifully through the hall. The audience sat frozen, their eyes locked on her, their hearts full, and she continued to play, heading toward the ending of her piece, unaware that she had already changed the entire room. The final part of her piece was approaching, but she didn't rush. She let the music guide her the way it always did. Her hands slowed just enough to let each last section breathe. She understood the importance of this moment, even if she didn't think about it consciously. When a piece of music reaches its final chapter, it is not just an ending. It is a reflection of everything that came before it. And she wanted the ending to feel honest, warm, and complete. The hall felt unreal in its silence. People were still sitting in the same positions, almost afraid to move. It was as if the whole room had transformed into a place where nothing existed except the sound of her music. She continued playing with a soft, emotional touch. Her fingers were gentle, but confident. The notes fell like soft drops of water, each one carrying its own meaning. She knew the ending of this piece by heart. She had practiced it hundreds of times. But tonight, something was different. Tonight it felt more meaningful, more alive. Every small detail mattered now, the way her fingers curved, the way her foot pressed the pedal, the way her breath matched each phrase. It was as if the music was speaking through her, saying everything she had never dared to say as she played through the closing melody. Her mind drifted for a moment, not away from the music, but deeper into it. She thought about the first time she had ever played this piece. She remembered how uncertain she was back then, how she felt like the music was too big for her. She also remembered the pain of feeling invisible, of feeling too quiet for the world to notice. She had always been the kind of person people overlooked in a crowded room. She never minded it much, but sometimes it did hurt. Sometimes she wished someone would see her, not just the outside of her, but the part of her that lived inside the music. Tonight, people were seeing her. Not because she asked for attention, not because she tried to impress anyone, but because her music finally spoke for her as she entered the softest section near the end. Her hands moved gently, almost like she was cradling something fragile. The notes floated softly through the hall, touching people in ways she could never have imagined. The woman in the front row, who had been watching with teary eyes, now let a tear roll down her cheek. A man sitting beside her placed a hand over his heart, moved by the emotional honesty of the sound. A young student in the third row blinked several times, trying to understand why music could make a person feel so deeply. But the young woman on stage didn't notice any of this. She was completely absorbed in the world she had created through her playing. Her focus remained on the keys, on the flow of the melody, on the emotional connection she felt with each single note. When the piece shifted again this time, toward its gentle rise before the final climax, her entire posture changed. She straightened slightly, her shoulders rising with the swell of the music. Her hands moved with more energy, more confidence, more strength. The audience felt the change instantly. There was something powerful in the air now, something that made every person feel like they were a part of the moment. She pressed the next series of notes with a rich intensity. The sound filled the hall like a warm sunrise. It was beautiful, full, and emotional. People in the audience felt something inside them lift, as if the music was carrying them upward. Some even forgot they were sitting in their seats, completely lost in the sound. Her fingers flew across the keys again, but this time with even greater control. Every movement was precise. Every sound was shaped with intention. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't thinking about what people thought of her. She wasn't thinking about mistakes, fears, or expectations. She was simply expressing herself with honesty, with courage, with everything she had inside. Then, slowly, she allowed the music to rest. The notes softened. The pace gentled. The sound became quiet, then quieter, like a peaceful breeze fading into the evening air. Her hands moved slower, her breaths deeper. She was guiding the music toward its final breath. The audience leaned in even closer, sensing the ending was near. No one wanted it to finish, but everyone wanted to hear how she would close it. The hall felt heavy with emotion, full but quiet, warm but still. She reached the final few lines of the piece, the part she loved the most. It was soft, delicate, and beautiful. She pressed each note with care, letting them hang in the air just long enough before moving to the next. Her fingers felt light, like feathers brushing against the keys. Then came the final moment. She lifted her hands slightly, held her breath, and pressed the last gentle chord. The sound floated into the air, soft but full, fading slowly until it disappeared completely, and then dashed nothing. Pure, complete silence. No one moved. No one clapped. No one even breathed too loudly. The hall was frozen, amazed, stunned. It was the kind of silence that followed something extraordinary. A silence that spoke louder than any applause ever could. People were digesting the beauty of what they had just heard. They were processing the fact that the shy girl they had doubted moments ago had given them a performance they would never forget. She kept her head lowered for a moment. She released a soft breath, unsure of what would happen next. Her heart beat slowly now, steady and calm. She felt peaceful. She felt relieved. For her, the performance was complete. She had given everything she had. She had shared the deepest part of herself through the music. She had done what she came here to do. She slowly lifted her head and looked toward the audience, not directly at their eyes, but at the space before her. She expected polite applause, maybe a few soft claps. She never expected anything more. But then, from somewhere in the middle of the hall, a single person began to clap. One simple, steady clap. And then another person joined. And then another. And then another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted into applause, loud, powerful, overwhelming applause. People stood up from their seats. Some clapped with both hands raised. Some clapped with tears in their eyes. Some clapped with wide smiles. It wasn't just applause, it was admiration, respect, appreciation for the beauty they had just witnessed. She blinked in shock. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined such a reaction. She had never expected to receive a standing ovation. For a moment, she wondered if it was real. She almost felt like she was dreaming. But the applause continued. It grew louder, stronger. People cheered softly, nodded at her, bowed their heads in respect. Some even placed their hands on their chest, touched deeply by her performance. The same people who had doubted her before were now standing proudly. Showing her how wrong they had been, she stood slowly from the bench, her legs slightly shaky, not from fear, but from emotion. She gave a small, humble bow. The applause became even louder. She felt warmth rush through her, relief, pride, gratitude, disbelief, all mixed together. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to explain anything. Her music had already spoken for her. She looked out at the hall one last time. For the first time that evening, she felt seen, not for her shyness, not for her quietness, but for her talent, her heart. Her music, as she walked off the stage, the applause followed her, echoing behind her like a warm wave. And she walked with a different kind of confidence now, not loud, not showy, but gentle and strong, because she knew something important. They had doubted her, but her music shattered every one of those doubts.